The Synchromystic presents Synchromystique. When rhapsodizing about elitist attitudes towards magic, synchromysticism, and one thing and another, Fortean researcher Michael Hoffman has periodically quoted an aperçu, evidently spun out of the orbit of Albert Einstein's relativistic physics. Time relations among events are assumed to be first constituted by the specific physical relations obtaining between them. One might be tempted to relegate this maxim to a file folder under the heading Mystifications. But let's try to understand it. Or, frankly, since comprehension might be a bit too ambitious for non-specialists in atomic physics, me included, let's try to apprehend it anyway. Sorcerer as poet and playwright. Though immediately we need to hang a few provisos on even that pretension. Here's one caveat. In answer to a question that I had put to him, Michael Hoffman once wrote the following: "A magical working is less like a mathematical formula and more like a script, a story, or a play, and the sorcerer, as poet and playwright, rules over this occult operation." Ex hypothesi, we'd expect that such workings would be augmented with appropriate casting, props, scenery, and, of course, media attention. And if you look, it's arguable that this is what you find. For example, Hoffman thinks this artistic orientation is apparent, albeit officially winked at, in countless high-profile events such as the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. In their Fortean classic, King Kill 33, James Shelby Downard and Hoffman note the fact that David W. Ferry and Clay L. Shaw were habitués of the old Storyville, that is, red light district, in New Orleans. Underlining the former's surname, Ferry, the authors bring the operative joke to the surface. The official assassination investigation amounted to a fairy tale. Get it? To emphasize the point, another Storyville character in the same drama was one Gordon Michael Novel. Novel, as in a book-length fiction? In the vast assassination literature, the flesh and blood novel is described as a French Quarter nightclub operator and a handler of anti-surveillance equipment, as well as, more honestly, a Central Intelligence agent. For an introduction to the tangle of CIA connections in the JFK assassination, see our dedicated video of 11/22/2023. But back to sorcerer poets. 20th century French surrealist Benjamin Perret asserted, quote, "There is a common denominator between the sorcerer, the poet, and the madman." And he added, "That common denominator can only be magic." Arguably, this link goes back through Elizabethan England to, in the memorable phraseology of William Francis Charles Wigston, Phantom Captain William Shakespeare, the Rosicrucian Mask, back even further into antiquity to characters like Orpheus and Hermes Trismegistus. Magical Impressionism. In the 20th century, magic, like most every other human endeavor, has been recast with the quicksilver of courant isms, such as individualism, liberalism, relativism, and so on. This has generated myriad idiosyncratic forms of occultism. American religious studies professor Arthur Verschluss calls one such phenomenon immediatism. It's another huge topic. Here's just an example or two. In Magic in Theory and Practice, Edward Alexander Aleister Crowley introduced the topic of barbarous names of evocation. These are unintelligible words that are used ritualistically. The self-styled Great Beast 666 drew attention to John Dee and Edward Kelly's angelic language of Enochian. Crowley admitted that the sources of these strings of syllables have baffled research. But then he remarked, "However this may be, it works," placing emphasis on that final word. Here, Crowley gives us a concise expression of pragmatism. For instance, Douglas McDermott, in the Encyclopedia of Philosophy, opens a pertinent article writing, quote, "Pragmatism claims that an ideology or a proposition is true if it works satisfactorily." American psychologist William James, the older brother of novelist Henry James, and co-founder with logician Charles Sanders Peirce of pragmatism, held that saying something was true basically came down to saying something is useful for someone and for some purpose. In other words, truth is usefulness. Or consider this excerpt from a writing of Zena Schreck, daughter of Satanic Church founder Howard Stanton Levy, aka Anton Zander LaVey. Of course, we profile LaVey in Top 10 Occultists. In Demons of the Flesh, Zena and co-author and then husband Nicholas Schreck said, quote, "We take the pragmatic view that any magical technique is merely a tool that can be used for the attainment of any desired objective." Now, not every theorist is affected by these trends, and those who are affected are not affected equally. But the upshot, as ex-Blondie musician Gary Lachman notes, is that in certain circles, occultists no longer fuss about ritualistic minutiae. Many are now more hard-nosed and results-oriented. They aim at increasing their net worths or finding soulmates, as opposed to, say, seeking enlightenment for its own sake, or getting to know their holy guardian angels. Whether this turn toward instrumentalism counts as modernism or postmodernism is debatable. As a first pass, we might think of particular practitioners, Lachman singles out chaos magicians, as trafficking in a sorcerous counterpart to artistic movements like Impressionism or Surrealism. The former was a 19th century affair mostly associated with French painters such as Edgar Degas, Claude Monet, and Camille Pissarro. The latter emerged out of Dadaism in the aftermath of World War I. Its principles included French writer André Breton, Spanish painter Salvador Dali, Jewish-American visual artist Emanuel Radnitsky, better known as Man Ray, and so on. I'm not an art specialist, so for a rough and ready contrast between these movements and the conventional artistic styles that preceded them, let's turn to the dictionary. There we read that Impressionists sought to capture feelings or experiences rather than to achieve accurate depictions. And for their part, Surrealists sought to release the creative potential of the unconscious mind, with a special emphasis on the approximation or reproduction of dream states. For our purposes, then, we'll think about the Einsteinian dictum in an impressionistic or surrealist sense. We're not aiming to exposit what a physicist would accept as an accurate depiction. Rather, we're appreciating how contemporary eclectic esoterics might appropriate relativity theory or data from other branches of science like quantum mechanics to achieve an abstract, dreamlike experience or feeling. Induced synchronicity. Turn again to Gary Lachman. Channeling Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Gustav Jung, Lachman said that in chaos magic, rituals function as induced synchronicities. Chaos, founded by Peter James Carroll and Ray Sherwin, was inspired by British magist Aleister Crowley, cosmic horror pioneer Howard Phillips H.P. Lovecraft, and proto-surrealist Austin Osman Spare. Lachman also fit varieties of the New Thought movement into this milieu. Recall that Norman Vincent Peale's The Power of Positive Thinking influenced 45th and 47th President Donald John Trump, among numerous others. Sometimes the various currents, pragmatism, synchronicity, and so on, coalesce. A conspicuous example of this would be Australian self-help celebrity Rhonda Byrne. Her best-selling 2006 book, The Secret, was arguably a repackaging of the claims of earlier writers, such as Napoleon Hill, Vernon Linwood Howard, Prentice Mulford, Joseph Dennis Murphy, and Wallace Wattles. Byrne followed up The Secret with two other titles, The Power and The Magic. Byrne is thus remarkable for at least two reasons. Firstly, her work seems to give us a clear example of a modern, postmodern spiritual pragmatism. The bulk of Byrne's appeal lies in the prospect that her disciples will learn how to reorder their lives for maximum preference satisfaction. In The Power, Byrne wrote, quote, "You are meant to have an amazing life. You are meant to have everything you love and desire. You are meant to have all the money you need. You are meant to be living your dreams," etc., etc. Secondly, Byrne presents her central principle against a backdrop of synchronicity. Her central principle is what occultist and New Thought writer William Walker Atkinson dubbed the law of attraction. This asserts that your experiences are a direct result of your thoughts. Byrne writes, quote, "There are no accidents or coincidences in life. Everything is synchronicity." For Byrne, if you're not alert, you miss the synchronicities that are directing your life. However, it's more than guidance or direction. Byrne quotes one Marie Diamond as saying, "The secret means that we are creators of our universe, and that every wish will manifest in our lives." In other words, by recognizing that thoughts are things, in the phraseology of Mulford, and that they have a creative, mystical causal power to shape your reality, you can bring about synchronicities. Howard called this mental magic. So to Byrne, if you're reminiscing about a friend who moved away years ago, and then that friend arrives unexpectedly at your door, or if you can't stop thinking about getting a phone call with a job offer, and then that phone call comes the next week, or even if you have a vision of a family member becoming sick, and then you hear that he or she has been taken to the hospital, in some unfathomable yet powerful way, all these events, according to her, were created by your thoughts. Now, the question that some people might ask is, just how is this supposed to work? Realize that for much of Byrne's audience, it's likely that this question really doesn't matter all that much. That's the legacy of immediatism, pragmatism, and the like. Just gimme. Who cares how? And so what if it doesn't work every time? Practice makes perfect. Yakety yak. As Aleister Crowley once stated, none of us dismiss our servant science. Every time the telephone gets out of order, the telephone people make no claim that it always works. Divination with equal modesty admits that it often goes wrong, but it works well enough. End quote. Obviously, this as long as it works attitude isn't just relegated to readers of The Secret. Magical techniques are to the would-be magician what the telephone is to the would-be salesperson. They're merely tools of the trade. Spellcasters need not concern themselves with how the rituals work, any more than telemarketers need to understand the difference between the tip and the ring in old phone wiring, or the ins and outs of code division multiple access cellular tech. Closer to home, many people take their prescriptions just to feel better. If the treatments work, then when it comes down to it, who cares what biology, chemistry, or psychology explains it? Can it be explained? But let's say you're curiouser than the average American. Byrne's theorists offer the following, quote, "Time is just an illusion. Einstein told us that. If this is the first time you've heard it, you may find it a hard concept to get your head around, because you see everything happening one thing after the other. What quantum physicists and Einstein tell us is that everything is happening simultaneously. If you can understand that there is no time and accept that concept, then you will see that whatever you want in the future already exists. If everything is happening at the one time, then the parallel version of you with what you want already exists." End quote. Let's spend some time with this, no pun intended, and try to grasp the proposed explanation by sticking a toe, or two or three, into these admittedly deep philosophical waters. Two views of time in philosophy. Here's a bundle of questions to start us off. Is the present moment privileged? To put it another way, is there something special about what is happening now? Relatedly, does time really flow or move? By way of answer to these questions, two philosophical camps have emerged. The first camp holds a position that, following 19th to 20th century British idealist philosopher J.M.E. McTaggart, has been called the A theory of time. In the A theory, the present is privileged. Accordingly, one popular variety of the A theory is, appropriately enough, called Presentism. Strictly speaking, the A theory and Presentism aren't identical or synonymous. But we're just going to ignore this complication and continue on our merry way. To the presentist, what's happening now is special. Special how? What's happening now really exists. What happened in the past did exist, but it doesn't exist any longer. So, for example, on the received view of paleontology, dinosaurs used to roam the Earth from the Triassic to the Cretaceous periods roughly 252 to 66 million years ago. Dinosaurs don't roam the Earth now, though contrarians like Charles Fort or cryptozoologists like Loren Coleman may beg to differ. Additionally, to the presentist, what happens in the future will exist, but it doesn't exist yet. Humans may someday have intergalactic spaceships and colonies sprinkled throughout the universe, Star Trek style. But we don't have that kind of technology now. Though again, cynics like Stanley Kubrick or troglodytes like the legendary Ned Ludd may demur. Our point is simply that to the presentist, tense, and let's keep it simple and just speak about the familiar past, present, and future, tense is a genuine and objective feature of reality. So the A theory is sometimes also called the tensed theory of time. Moreover, to an A theorist, the passage of time is real. Events and things really are marching into the future from the past through the present. Or if you like turning things around, future potentiality is becoming actual in the present and then fading into the past. But from whichever direction you wish to view it, reality is in process on this view. And as if we didn't have enough vocabulary already, the A theory may be called the process or dynamic view of time. But we'll try to stick to presentism. In contrast to the A theory, still according to McTaggart's nomenclature, is the B theory. To B theorists, the present moment is neither privileged nor special in metaphysical terms. Though it is important to note that what we mean by metaphysics here is the study of what exists. For more on the often confusing vocabulary word metaphysics, which is sometimes used as a synonym for occultism, spiritualism, and the like, see 10 Words of Power. We'll call this presentist alternative, this B theory, eternalism, after an important version of that theory. However, we have to attach a similar proviso as we did when introducing the former as a synonym for the A theory, namely, eternalism is not the only variety of the B theory on offer. That wrinkle aside, according to eternalism, all moments of time, whether past, present, or future, quote-unquote, are equally real. You might get a grasp on this admittedly tricky idea by way of another tenet of eternalism. To the eternalist, space and time are relevantly similar in an important sense. Namely, an object's reality is unaffected by its location. Think of a spatial case. For example, the Taj Mahal is in Agra, India. But as I record this, I'm not in Agra, India, so the Taj Mahal isn't spatially located where I am. From my standpoint, I cannot truly say the Taj Mahal is here with me. But obviously, from the fact that the Taj Mahal is not here with me, doesn't follow for 1 second that the Taj Mahal doesn't exist at all. It exists all right, just over there in India. Similarly, Brachiosaurus allegedly lived 161 million years ago. I didn't live 161 million years ago. Therefore, Brachiosaurus isn't temporally located when I am. So I can't say Brachiosaurus is with me now. But, the eternalist argues, the fact that there are no Brachiosaurus now doesn't mean that Brachiosaurus doesn't exist at all. It exists back then, in the late Jurassic period. To the eternalist, words like here and now function only to identify a speaker's location in space or time. The words here and now have no implications for an object's existence. To the eternalist, then, it's true to say that Brachiosaurus exists, just as surely as the Taj Mahal, even though both are hard to detect. After all, we exist here and now, whereas Brachiosaurus and the Taj Mahal exist there and then. Get the picture? Another way to say this is that while the apparent passage of time is important to us psychologically, that doesn't tell us anything about the way the world is objectively, in itself. To the eternalist, the passage of time is merely a feature of our subjective experience of the world. Time, to the eternalist, is essentially tenseless. Past, present, and future merely reflect our ways of perceiving and talking about the world. If there were no human or other sentient observers, then there would be no impression of flowing time or of tense. By the way, the debate between presentists and eternalists is ongoing. But really, what's to discuss? Isn't it uncontroversial that presentism is the common sense view, and that it comports with our experience of time? How could we ever have enough reason to displace presentism? Enter Albert Einstein. Despite the presumption in favor of presentism, eternalism got a boost early in the 20th century from relativistic physics. Still trying to keep things light and impressionistic, let's just say the following. Arguably, when German-Jewish theoretical physicist Albert Einstein formulated the special theory of relativity in 1905, he didn't initially take a position on the issue that we're concerned with. However, soon after the publication of Special Relativity, Polish-Jewish mathematician Hermann Minkowski suggested that reality is four-dimensional. According to this idea, usually designated Minkowski space, reality has three spatial dimensions, height, length, and width, as well as one temporal dimension. In other words, for Minkowski, time is the fourth dimension. As an aside, four-dimensionality reverberates through the occult, not least in the hypercube, aka the Tesseract, which appears in several Marvel Comics movies. So hold that thought for a later presentation. Picking back up, according to some philosophers and scientists, our ordinary conception of time must be replaced with the space-time theory, according to which time is like space, in the manner we just rehearsed. Perhaps the next obvious question would be, are we supposed to take Minkowski literally? And you might be thinking, well, what other way could we take him? One possibility, going back to our discussion of pragmatism, is that we could try to understand 4D talk instrumentally. Here's an example. We sometimes hear claims such as the average American family has X children, 2.4 children, 1.9 children, whatever. But obviously, there is no family that has precisely 2.4 or 1.9 children. Therefore, you could say that there is no such entity as the average American family. However, the construct of the average American family could still be a useful way of talking. For example, for economists. Or here's another illustration of taking something instrumentally. Think of the study of atoms. The Bohr model, named after Danish physicist Niels Bohr, represents atoms as sort of miniature solar systems. There is a sun-like nucleus in the center, with electrons orbiting it like planets. This has been now supplanted by representations deemed better informed by later discoveries in quantum mechanics. But even though the Bohr model isn't literally true, it still usefully introduces the basic subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, and electrons, and tells you their basic relationships. In other words, it could still be useful to think of the average American family or the Bohr model of the atom, even though neither is literally true. In this way, you could hold that what is now called Einstein-Minkowski spacetime is just a fiction, like the average American family or the Bohr model of the atom. And at the same time, you could still maintain that it's a useful way of talking for physicists. But that's not what Minkowski said. For his part, he took space-time ontologically. It was not merely a geometrical representation of the world of space and time as described by Einstein's special relativity. Rather, it was the world. It was the way the world actually is. Moreover, As soon as Einstein encountered Minkowski's formulation of special relativity, he himself also became an outspoken realist concerning space-time. With Einstein on board, eternalism, the idea that the world really is a four-dimensional mashup of space and time, was in some quarters able to overcome the preference for presentism. That is, even though our experience of the world leads us inevitably to believe that presentism is true, once you understand the physics of special relativity, then you'll see that the way the world appears to be is mistaken. One way to think about this combination, call it space-time, is that it's a gigantic, changeless aggregation of everything that from our time-bound perspectives has, does, or will ever exist. In this picture, reality behaves like a single four-dimensional object. This object, sometimes called the space-time manifold, is accordingly literally a collection of everything that exists. It is on account of this that eternalism is also sometimes called the block view of space-time. Time is an illusion? Let's go back to Rhonda Byrne. According to her, Einstein told us, quote-unquote, time is an illusion. Then she adds, if you can understand that there is no time, then you will see that whatever you want in the future already exists. If everything is happening at the one time, then the parallel version of you with what you want already exists. Now, her summary here is a bit puzzling. As we've seen, if future circumstances exist, then this implies or requires an eternalist view of time, according to which all times are real. After all, what you want in the future can't already exist, strictly speaking, unless the future is out there, somewhere in reality. The thought is that to give credence to this, you need only turn to Einstein, Minkowski, and contemporary scientific developments like relativity theory. To Einstein and Minkowski, all times, and all places for that matter, are sprawled across the complex four-dimensional geometry we call space-time. Objects, including future you, allegedly with everything that present you desires, are located somewhere within the space-time block. So far, so good? But for Einstein, and for philosophical eternalists, time remains a real, objective component of the world, albeit one that must be redefined or restructured. In their picture, future you and present you occupy two equally real space-time locations. Both of these yous exist. Where each you exists is expressed by spatial coordinates. But where you are changes over time. Therefore, to find one of these yous within the block, we need to do more than just refer to a place. We need to refer also to a time. Here's an analogy. Suppose that I found the long-sought-after secret to the treasure alleged to be buried on Oak Island, off the coast of the Canadian province of Nova Scotia. Suppose further that I wanted to share the treasure's location with you, so that you could help me dig it up. It wouldn't be enough for me to merely give you two coordinates, say the latitude and longitude of the island. Anybody with access to Wikipedia can discover that the island lies at 44 degrees north and 64 degrees west, give or take minutes and seconds. Using that information, many treasure hunters have spent their lives excavating, turning up precisely nothing. The treasure isn't on the surface, after all. Therefore, two coordinates are not enough to find it. The actual location of the treasure, assuming that there is one, would ultimately have to be specified in 3 dimensions to be useful. Specifically, we need to know its altitude or depth. Similarly, if future you, with all your goodies, exists already in the space-time block, we would need 4 coordinates to locate you. The 3 dimensions of height, length, and width won't cut it. To see where and when future you is, we need a 4th time coordinate as well. But even if time is relegated to the 4th coordinate in a space-time location, it's hard to see how something so crucial can be dismissed as an illusion, as Byrne says. In the special theory of relativity, Einstein determined that time is relative. Time isn't an illusion. In one of his letters, Einstein did write, quote, "The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." Get that. The distinction between past, present, and future is the illusion. In this, he seems to agree with the eternalist. The illusion is the passage of time, rather than time per se. We experience time as if it were flowing, and we think there's a deep difference between past, present, and future. But this is a feature of our psychology, not a feature of the world. In truth, all times are equally real, but therefore, they're not equally illusory. Yes, for the eternalist, time is static, not dynamic. In fact, eternalism is also called the stasis view of time for this reason. But even static time, if it be such, is existing time. In short, neither relativity nor eternalism get you to the notion that time, in and of itself, is an illusion. Two views of time in physics. 17th to 18th century English alchemist, physicist, and polymath Sir Isaac Newton was one of a handful of thinkers who have exerted an outsized influence on the modern world. For example, Thomas Jefferson considered Rosicrucian godfather and statesman Sir Francis Bacon, political philosopher John Locke, and Isaac Newton to be the three greatest men that have ever lived without any exception. Jefferson further acknowledged the fruits of their intellectual labors as having laid the foundations of the physical and moral sciences. But Newton's physics notably diverged from that which has been propounded in the 20th century by relativity theorists. Namely, Newton was an absolutist, or a substantivalist, about time and space. In the substantival view, space itself is a substance in which the objects of the universe exist and move. You could think of absolute space, in Newton's sense, as an empty physical container within which physical objects reside. It's possible to give a similarly substantival description of time, in which time is a succession of empty moments, serving as a kind of temporal container for events. In other words, Newtonian absolutism, or substantivalism, is the thesis that space and time exist always and everywhere independently of physical material, that is matter, and independently of events. The opposing view is called relationalism. It arguably goes back to Aristotle, who thought that there is no time apart from change, and that time is simply the measure of change. Relationalism thus denies that space and time have existence independently of physical events and objects. Relationalism is also sometimes called relationism, or the relational view of spacetime. It might also be called a Leibnizian view, after the 17th to 18th century German rationalist philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Now, this distinction is crucial, so let's bear down on it. One way to approach the distinction between absolute and relational space or time is via questions like, would time exist even if nothing changed? Or, would space or time exist even if there were no physical events or objects at all? Now, if you've never considered these matters, it might be worth pausing just to give it a think for a moment. Relationalists claim that time necessarily involves change, and substantivalists say that it does not. On substantivalism, space and time provide a large, invisible, inert container within which matter exists and moves independently of the container. To the substantivalist, if you took all the objects out of the universe, you would still have a vast empty space. If you take away all events, then, to the Newtonian substantivalist, you'd have a vast empty time, a bare duration. Relationalism, on the other hand, implies that space and time are not like this. It implies that there is no container. To a relationalist, if you take away matter's motions, you take away time. And if you take away the matter itself, you take away space. To put this last point differently, relationalism holds that space is only a set of relationships among physical material, and time is only a set of relationships among physical events. All this is of paramount importance for our topic. Therefore, let's hear it once more, slightly rephrased. A relational description of time is one in which time simply is the changes in physical objects, and space is nothing more than the physical things that exist. Once upon a time, see what I did there, I traced a detailed examination of these sentiments to the 20th to 21st century German-born Jewish-American philosopher of science, Adolf Grünbaum. Grunbaum's 1963 tome, Philosophical Problems of Space and Time, is dense. We won't scrutinize it, but I do wish to draw your attention to a few of its sentences. For example, on pages 345 to 346, we read, quote, "In opposition to the absolutistic conception of space and time ingredient in the Newtonian theory, Einstein espoused a conception of time and space which is relational, by regarding them as systems of relations between physical events and things." End quote. If you're still with me, you can perhaps see the pieces coming together, at least impressionistically, because Grunbaum is here expressing the distinction that we've been laboring over. And now, here's part of Grunbaum's next sentence. Quote, "Time relations are first constituted by the system of physical relations obtaining among events." In case that's not ringing any bells, Grunbaum recapitulates the idea on page 352. There we find him summarizing Einstein's conceptual innovation regarding simultaneity, beginning with the following words, quote, "Time relations among events, having been first assumed as first constituted by physical relations obtaining between them, ... Okay, now that has to sound familiar, right? I hope so, because it's virtually identical to the quotation we find reproduced by Downard and Hoffman. Here's their quotation one more time. "Time relations among events are assumed to be first constituted by the specific physical relations obtaining between them." There you have it. Downard and Hoffman noticed, or supposed, that at least some contemporary occultists have adopted philosophical eternalism and a relational view of time. Probably because those occultists believe, or hope, or wish that Einstein-Minkowski spacetime is true ontologically. And because of this, said occultists have updated their instruction manuals and spellbooks with relativity in mind. At least, again, impressionistically, or surrealistically. By the way, does relationalism provide the missing premises needed to conclude that time is an illusion, as Byrne put it? As we've seen, relationalism does hold that time can be reduced, quote-unquote, to relations among physical events. So if time can be eliminated as an absolute, standalone entity, then wouldn't this be enough to make time an illusion? I suppose it depends on how high a standard you want to impose for something to count as real. As Noam Chomsky somewhere put it, real is frequently more of an honorific term than anything else. I don't want to argue about the word. Just bear in mind that according to relationalism, space is likewise eliminated as an absolute standalone entity. Therefore, on relationalism, we'd have equal grounds for saying space is an illusion as we do for saying that time is an illusion. Yet, although you're free to take the route of relationalism, people rarely say the same thing about space as they do about time. Okay, but what's it all mean? Just to be clear, by our lights, and from a philosophical, scientific physicalist point of view, the jury's still out on issues such as whether our world conforms to the A theory of time or the B theory of time, whether presentism or eternalism are the best representatives of those theories, and whether time is substantival or relational. None of these is off the table, academically speaking. Each of these views has its own prima facie merits and demerits, and its own defenders and detractors. Presentism conforms nicely with our apparent day-to-day experience. Eternalism has a robust cheering section in university physics departments. Without playing favorites, all we'll say is that the pictures presented by each option are widely believed to be internally consistent when they are carefully formulated. This is simply to say that there's no one view that's obviously incorrect. At the same time, popular appropriations of these difficult ideas are not immune from going off the rails. And by the way, I don't exempt this from that statement. Now, in a few moments, we will get back to The Secret of Rhonda Byrne and briefly register one or two concerns with some of her material. But before we do that, let's make a few summary remarks about the Downard-Hoffman treatment of this admittedly difficult to understand picture. For their parts, I doubt Shelby Downard or Mike Hoffman had the likes of Byrne or her New Thought predecessors specifically in mind, in the first place anyway, when they quoted the Einsteinian time relations adage. We need only look at the broader context in which that adage appears in their written work. In Secret Societies, Michael Hoffman mentions the quotation in a section titled Mystical Toponymy, where we read, quote, "Mystical toponymy and alchemical cant language are part of a process which hinges on a marriage between action in time, or recorded history, and physical locations on the earth regarded as places of power by the cryptocracy's magical geographical vision of the earth as a giant chessboard, symbolized by the tessellated floor of Solomon's Temple and the Masonic Lodge, and Alice's vision of the world in Lewis Carroll's Wonderland fantasy. The relativistic epigraph is likewise situated in King Kill 33, where the mystical toponymy in view pertains specifically to the JFK assassination. In King Kill 33, Downard and Hoffman, quote, chart a trail of symbolism associated with the 32nd degree of parallel latitude by means of synchromistically important places, such as the Mason Road, Mason Noel Bar, Trace Hermanus, or Three Sisters, Shakespeare, Macbeth, McBird, Johnson Mountain, Kennedy Mountain, Ruby Road, and so on. Let's not get distracted by the flurry of detail, as fascinating as that is. For when we inspect the quotation itself, in light of the supplied examples, we realize that what's being asserted is quite remarkable. James Shelby Downard is to be credited with this breathtaking association. Downard was somehow able to intuit a connection between rarefied, ivory-towered debates on the cutting edge of the philosophy of physics and pedestrian-seeming, ostensible irrelevancies, like that there's a little New Mexico town called Truth or Consequences, lying along the 33rd degree of north latitude. Stated succinctly, the deeply penetrating ideas which have motivated untold, often illuminating symbol studies might be distilled down to these. Firstly, the actors and locations injected into spectacular crimes, like the Kennedy assassination, really matter. And this is not just for the flat-footed reason that we want to know who done it, where, and when, as if we were guessing the combination for a cosmic game of Clue. Rather, the people and places constitute the physical objects used by behind-the-scenes stage managers in their attempts to, as Hoffman puts it, bend time. Hoffman elsewhere associates this effect with words like Wicca, Wicker, and Wikipedia. Well, maybe I threw that last one in there myself. As a function of our magician as playwright dynamic, the physical objects and venues are props and backdrops, yes, but the addition of the broadly Einsteinian, eternalist, relationalist idea of time raises the stakes. This is because to a believer in a four-dimensionally structured space-time, time relations literally reduce to the relations among physical objects. To put it differently, according to this application of what's being called the Einsteinian dictum, spatiotemporality is nothing other than matter arranged a particular way. Alter the arrangement of the matter, you alter space-time. Therefore, physical objects and venues for dramatic events like the Kennedy assassination are not just props and backdrops, they are literally the means of altering space-time. Mind you, we're not saying that this works, or that eternalism is the true picture of reality, though we're not denying it either. It's a question for another day. But we do suspect that this, or something relevantly like it, is the prevailing opinion among undercover esoterics within the beau monde. While Rhonda Byrne's books may have solved her present and future problems with disappointment, frustration, and poverty, reportedly to the tune of some $300 million according to Google, we're more interested in all those unsung, self-styled poet-sorcerers whose even deeper pockets permit them to rearrange the globe like their personal chessboards for magical purposes. Still, since Byrne's published writings are both accessible and non-technical, let's use her work, or her sources, to gesture toward directions in which this framework could be open to criticism. Taking stock. So let's think about pop New Ageism, a la Rhonda Byrne. For all intents and purposes, Byrne is concerned with personal wish fulfillment. Say that present you is feeling unfulfilled. Well, this is a problem no matter what view of time you hold, right? But Byrne seems to find the eternalist picture somewhat helpful here. She wants you to think about reality something like this. If eternalism is true, then future you already exists. How does she know that even given the resources of eternalism, future you isn't just as miserable or even worse off as present you? Well, this is where the impressionistic part arguably comes charging in. Here's my best attempt to express her ideas charitably. Evidently, Byrne wants you to suppose that since future you exists already, present you can have full confidence that your future fulfillment and happiness are inevitable, if that is, future you is situated serene and content. At the same time, it seems Byrne believes that somehow your present acts of focused imagination and positive thinking make a difference to the future you. Byrne appears to think, or at least she asserts, that present you's positivity results in a happy version of future you, or at any rate, a happier version than you would have gotten if present you is in the doldrums. It even seems to some readers that present you can somehow cash in on any future bliss right now. Why is that again? Because everything's simultaneous, quote-unquote. In this, Byrne seems to be saying that future you's happiness is, with enough optimism, available to you right now. I think that this is close to the general conception she's working with, and on the face of it, there's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. In a few minutes, we'll ask if Byrne's hopeful beliefs are, in the final analysis, compatible with the eternalist framework that she's arguably wedded to. But for now, let's think about, quote, everything is happening simultaneously, in her words. Recall Gary Lachman's aphorism that magic is, or can be thought of as, induced synchronicity. Google defines synchronicity as the simultaneous occurrence of events. Simultaneity, of course, refers to events that happen or occur at the same time. Now, according to Byrne, what quantum physicists and Einstein tell us is that, quote, everything is happening simultaneously, end quote. Byrne proceeds to say, quote, if this is the first time you have heard this, then you may find it a hard concept to get your head around because you see everything happening one thing after the other. But Einstein tells us that everything is happening simultaneously. Now there's three crucial words to consider, and let's consider them one at a time, starting with the word happening. Everything is happening simultaneously. In everyday speech, when something happens, we mean that it unfolds across or over time. To put it slightly differently, if an apple happens to fall from a tree and clunk Isaac Newton on the head, then Newton goes from sitting peacefully to having an inspiring pain develop on his noggin. But for something like this to truly happen in the ordinary sense, then the passage of time must be real. If the passage of time is unreal, as Einstein and the eternalists hold, then getting down to brass tacks, you might say that nothing happens, strictly so-called, ever. Events just seem to happen. Here's an analogy. Imagine you work in an old-fashioned movie theater. You could pull out a canister of film and observe that each movie was recorded on a spool of celluloid. The spool consists of a series of frames, each of which displays a single static image. To watch a movie, a film projector shines a light through each celluloid frame onto a screen as a motor advances the spool from one frame to the next. This setup gives viewers the impression that on-screen images are moving and changing, even though the images themselves are really motionless and fixed during the recording process. If eternalism is correct, then the whole space-time manifold is as fixed and unchanging as the spool of film. Now granted, somehow human psychology is such that things appear to us to move, and the present moment lights up for us in a mysterious way. But as we've discussed, on eternalism, these are all subjective matters. It's our perception of the world that makes it seem so. The world itself, objectively, is static and unmoving. After all, the space-time manifold is a block of events that are, in their totality, a fait accompli. What we call past differs from what we call present and future only in terms of where or when they're situated within the space-time block. Their time coordinates differ. That's it. Recall that Einstein called our belief that the past, present, and future differ in any fundamental respect a stubborn and persistent illusion. Sure, events in our lives are spread out over time, but none of them happens in the common sense way. Okay, so much for the word happening. But is Byrne correct to say that Einstein has everything happening simultaneously in his conception of relativity? Evidently not. According to Einstein, simultaneity is relative to what's called the observer's reference frames. Some events are simultaneous for some observers in some reference frames. Other events are not. Moreover, different observers may have different reference frames. The bottom line appears to be no. Not everything is happening simultaneously according to relativity theory. Worse still, if everything were happening simultaneously, then literally all events would turn out to be synchronicities in a trivial sense. After all, if synchronicities are events that happen at the same time, and everything is happening simultaneously, then all events are synchronicities. To riff on a line from the character Syndrome in Pixar's 2004 animated film The Incredibles, if everything is a synchronicity, then nothing is. To put it another way, it would be nice to have a theory of synchronicity that preserves our intuition that there's something special about these events. For example, it seems that they don't always occur. So when they do occur, the thought is, we ought to take note of them, treat them as somehow marvelous or even illuminating, etc. But if, again, synchronicities are partially defined as simultaneous events, and if, to someone like Byrne, all events whatsoever are simultaneous, then all events whatsoever are synchronicities. And that doesn't seem special in the least. Of course, earlier we quoted from Byrne in The Power, seemingly to this effect. She wrote, quote, "There are no accidents or coincidences in life. Everything is synchronicity," end quote. In light of my criticisms, I think the most charitable way to interpret her here is to say this. When she writes that everything is synchronicity, she is encouraging the view that ostensible coincidences in our lives are meaningful and not accidental. In other words, she's saying that all seeming accidental coincidences are, in fact, meaningful synchronicities. She's not saying that all events whatsoever are synchronicities. My criticism, again, is that if all events were literally simultaneous, then all events would count as synchronicities. Events would be temporally indistinguishable. After all, the word coincidence means to fall upon or happen together. And the word synchronous likewise means occurring or existing at the same time, which is exactly what simultaneous means as well. If you dreamt about your friend last night, and then your friend calls you this morning, those two events, your dream and the phone call, are only coincidental if they happen at or near the same time. And they're only meaningful synchronicities if they happen at different times from all the other nights when you did not dream about your friend and all the other mornings when she did not call you. But if all events, past, present, and future, are simultaneous, then all events are coincidental. There would be no grounds for drawing special attention to a particular dream or a particular phone call. To mark those out as special, we need times to be different. Last night and this morning cannot be simultaneous with a week ago or 2 years from now. Okay, enough of that. If I'm umping and it looks like Rhonda Byrne has swung and missed on all three words, happening, simultaneous, and synchronicity, then, like it or not, I have to call her out. Does this mean that there's nothing to the concept of synchronicity? Well, if I thought that, I wouldn't be making videos for this channel at all. No, I think it simply means that we need to search elsewhere than The Secret for an account of what synchronicity is. But who among you is really surprised about that parallel version of you? In all honesty, if Rhonda Byrne's work has given us an opportunity to think carefully about many ideas that are of interest to us, and it certainly has, then it, and she, deserves at least some credit. And, truth be told, Byrne provides critical readers with much that may be thought-provoking. Here's one last example of that. She wrote, quote, "If you understand there is no time, then you will see that whatever you want in the future already exists. If everything is happening at the one time, then the parallel version of you with what you want already exists." Let's zoom in on that phrase. In contemporary culture these days, there's a lot of talk and Marvel movie dialogue about things such as the so-called multiverse, about parallel universes, about a world ensemble, and the like of those. Googling, define parallel version of you, at the time of this writing, we find the following AI-generated result. Quote, "A parallel version of you is a hypothetical concept that refers to another version of you that exists in a different universe. The idea is that there are other universes that exist alongside our own, and that in some of these universes you may have made different decisions that led to a different life, end quote. The question of parallel worlds, and by extension, parallel versions of you within at least some of those worlds, is another tangled knot. We won't even try to unravel it fully here. Suffice it to say that I find it at least as difficult to be sympathetic to Byrne's talk about parallel yous as I did regarding her assertions about universal simultaneity. Frankly, I'm just not sure how to understand what she's trying to say. For example, maybe she means to talk about parallel versions of people in a sense similar to that offered by the late Australian philosopher David Kellogg Lewis. According to Lewis's modal realism, articulated in the book Plurality of Worlds, there are so many other possible worlds that absolutely every way that a world could possibly be is a way that some world is. The problem for Byrne is that, for Lewis, there are no spatio-temporal or causal relations of any kind among the possible worlds. In other words, Lewisian worlds are isolated. Nothing that happens at one world can cause anything to happen at any other world, nor do the worlds overlap. So, to put it colorfully, there are Lewisian worlds where I am richer than a Rockefeller. There are worlds where I'm living under a bridge. And there are all sorts of worlds in between. In fact, there are many, many more worlds where I have no resident counterpart at all. But for all this, no matter how hard I focus, however hopefully I imagine, regardless of how fervently I wish, no parallel version of me in David Lewis's sense has anything to do with me in this world. Ever. If this world isn't a richer than a Rockefeller world for me, then my opulent Lewisian twin does me no good, unless we count the fact that his existence makes certain of my utterances true, such as when I say, it's possible that I'm rich. Another false trail from the standpoint of positive thinking is 20th century American physicist Hugh Everett III's idea of many worlds. Offered as an interpretation of quantum theory, the many worlds hypothesis was proposed in response to Werner Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Also known as quantum indeterminacy, Heisenberg's concept has it that some subatomic events behave non-deterministically. For example, according to Heisenberg, particular facts about subatomic particles, such as their position and velocity, cannot be known together. When you measure one of these states precisely, the less precisely you can measure the other. A pressing question in physics is this indeterminacy metaphysical? That is, does it pertain to the way the world itself is, or is it epistemic? That is it just a limit on what we can know about the world? Without trudging further into this thicket, suffice it to say that Everett was trying to preserve the determinacy of the world. According to his many worlds thesis, when it comes to quantum events, every possible outcome actually occurs, thus eliminating the puzzle of why one outcome would occur but not another. But clearly, not every outcome occurs in the observable world, leading Everett to suppose that quantum measurement causes parallel universes, or the many worlds, to branch off from this world. In Everett's understanding, our universe is continually splitting into innumerable permutations following every quantum event. Each copy of the world realizes a different possible outcome. And this produces an increasingly bloated ontology. But to Everett, having countless ever-increasing worlds was better than saying that quantum events in and of themselves are indeterminate. To be sure, there will be countless yous inhabiting the panoply of Everett's many worlds. But unfortunately, these multifarious worlds have no connections with one another once they split. And if you in this world draw the short straw in some wave function collapse, you're SOL. So, lamentably, neither of these frameworks, Lewis's or Everett's, are especially fruitful for explaining the law of attraction in terms of philosophy or physics. Psychology is another matter. However, there is at least one other sort of parallel version of you talk that we should consider. And yes, it takes us right back to earlier discussions of eternalism, four-dimensionality, and that whole ball of wax. So sorry to burst your bubble if you hope that this journey was over. We have said a lot about eternalism's claim that all times are real. Just as objects far away from us in space are just as real as things on Earth, likewise, objects far away in time are just as real as objects that exist now. Both past objects, for example dinosaurs, and future objects, for example human outposts on Mars perhaps, exist, in addition to objects in the present, according to eternalism. However, there's one other element of this picture, one that's been called the core claim of four-dimensionalism, and this is the notion of a temporal part. To get a handle on this, start with the parts that we're familiar with. Material objects take up space by having parts. Take my body, for example. My body occupies a certain region of space. Part of this region is occupied by my head, another by my torso. Other parts of the region are occupied by my arms and legs. These various regions, considered individually, may be called my spatial parts. And taken together, setting aside the question of possible immaterial entities such as minds or souls, these parts constitute me, at least as you would encounter me at any given time. So far, so good. Well, the corresponding fact about time, according to the Eternalist, is that an object lasts over a stretch of time by having different parts located at the different times within that stretch. These temporal parts are objects just as real as my spatial parts, my head, my arms, and my legs. In this picture, then, over the entirety of her life, a person is the sum of all her temporal parts, just as, at any given time, she's the sum of all her spatial parts. This means that on eternalism, future you is not a parallel version of you, either in Lewis's sense of being a possible way that you yourself could be, or in Everett's sense of being one of the untold inhabitants of the many worlds caused by quantum events. Rather, future you is merely one of your own temporal parts, the one that has time coordinates that are later than all the earlier parts. To grasp for a spatial analogy, your head is not a parallel version of your feet. Your head is just the part of you that occupies a spatial location with the greatest altitude coordinate, whereas your feet are the parts of you with the least altitude, when you're standing upright, of course. Ordinarily, at any given time, when we talk about your person, we treat your head and your feet as spatially distributed parts of one and the same you. Your head and your feet are not different yous. Your head and your feet are both parts of you. Similarly, if you want to adopt eternalism, then you should get comfortable talking about present you and future you as temporally distributed parts of one and the same person. You. Future you is not a parallel version of you. Future you is your future temporal part. Even worse, philosopher Adam Patrick A.P. Taylor argues that four-dimensionalism and the desire-satisfaction account of well-being are incompatible. Simply stated, a desire-satisfaction theory of well-being claims that the satisfaction of one's desires is what makes one's life go well. We have been assuming that desire satisfaction is a root motivation for much of Rhonda Byrne's clientele. Taylor invites you to suppose that yes, indeed, future you has everything present you desires. Suppose that. Even if present you and future you share the same desires, and future you is well pleased with her situation, present you will simply not exist long enough to see her desires satisfied. Remember, present you and future you occupy two different regions of space-time. Future you's triumphs have nothing to do with present you. In 4Dism, the region of space-time present you tenselessly occupies is unchanging. This is to say, present you's location in space-time is unalterable. Given that present you's desires are unfulfilled, that's the way present you will remain statically. Taylor suggests the four-dimensionalist does better to reject the desire satisfaction theory, while the defender of the desire satisfaction theory does better to reject four-dimensionalism. You can't have your cake and eat it too, in other words. Neither option bodes especially well for fans of The Secret. As to would-be time-wicking magi of a more globalist hue, we'll have to revisit them later, if the future isn't an illusion, of course. Let us know in the comments if any of this is helpful. If you object to something, or have just plain had enough, let us know that as well. We're open to viewer requests, so please don't hesitate to propose topics for consideration. Left to ourselves, this is sometimes what you'll get.